And so he was reading about churches and church planting, and then one night, I was in bed, and he asked me about the idea of planting a church. And I thought, being spiritual like I am, that a nice, consistent, solid church already in existence would be a much better idea and a much more steady stream of income. And so he said, I think we could probably plant right in Blaine. And then what clinched it was, as he went around and talked with some of the pastors in the area, especially the evangelical pastors, he went up to Constance and they gave us a green light. They said, come in, recruit in our church. If you can get a couple families to go with you, that's okay with us. And we checked over at Coon Rapids Evangelical Free Church, and they said the same thing. We could come in, we could put up a table, we could do some sermons, we could recruit, and if we could recruit a couple families, that would be great. And so between that recruitment and a couple of college students that Ron already knew, we formed our core group.
And so, in late 2002, with the support of the Evangelical Free Church denomination and the open-handedness of area churches Constance and Coon Rapids E-Free, a small Go team was formed, a team that would be the very beginnings of Cornerstone Church of Blaine. But there was much work to be done before they could even hold their first Sunday service.
We joked Caleb was our first recruit because we were standing at the booth in Constance, and we'd set up the booth and we'd try to talk to people, and he was reading over the information. So he must have been in third grade maybe, around then. And he looked at it all and he said, yeah, I think I'm going to join this church.
The core team was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. There were a lot of meetings, a lot of learning, a lot of growing, learning what church is all about. And it was, like I said, a lot of fun, but a lot of work. We would read different books. We would have a lot of meetings to talk about what kind of issues we might encounter. We had the Free Church guiding us, taking us through different steps. So we would learn what things we might encounter. So just a lot of personal growth and just spending a lot of time. We had different committees. For example, something that a lot of people would love was developing a constitution and bylaws.
And it was an exciting time and a really unifying time. Really grew really close together and knew that we were setting out on something that we wanted to see succeed. And it was just a fun time.
And the core team worked tirelessly for months to prepare for their first actual Sunday service, each person dedicated to reaching the Blaine area with the message of Jesus. They would eventually come to meet at Roosevelt Middle School, and by 2003, Cornerstone Church of Blaine was ready to open its doors.
The first church services was the beginning of April in 2003, and we actually did 3, if you want to call it a practice service, where it wasn't open to the community, where we were just kind of learning for ourselves, worshiping together ourselves, and then we invited the community after that. The very first Sunday was full of excitement for this new thing we were doing, and there was also a strange idea, is this real? Because we're creating a church, and are we allowed to do this? And all kinds of things like that. Is this a real thing? Are we just pretending church? But there was a lot of excitement and unknowns.
Innovation and hard work were the hallmark of those early years.
That was an adventure. That was a lot of work. If anyone who is a part of Cornerstone now knows how much work it is, that was even more work because we had to set up 100 chairs every week. There was just a lot more there even than there is here. The nursery met in the lunchroom, which was not ideal, but we managed to keep the kids corralled between lunch tables and everything. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was great because we had, like I said, a great group of people that were so dedicated, and they didn't mind the time that they spent setting up and taking down every week.
We always had a break right in the middle of the service where we would have coffee and snacks and things to eat, and so the church really developed relationally because we really took time to get to know people during that time. And that was probably like one of the sacred cows we had to eventually break away from. It was hard because everybody loved that time, but Ron was trying to think of creative ways to flick the lights and get people back in to the service after this break, because they loved having conversations with each other so much.
Having been in the middle school for 2 short years, Cornerstone found it would already be making its first, somewhat scary move to the bigger, more expensive Blaine High School.
I used to tell people that we got kicked out of Roosevelt for bad behavior. In reality, the school began construction work to remove asbestos in the school. So during their summer work, we couldn't be in the building. So it forced us to move to Blaine, and there was a lot of trepidation. We weren't sure if we were really ready for that big auditorium and for the extra cost that was going to be involved. And so there were, again, a lot of unknowns, but it has turned out to be a good thing.
It was huge. I mean, we walked in that church and it was big. And then when summer would come along, it was pitiful. I mean, and I think, a lot of years, I have to give the core group and the original people to the church credit. A lot of people didn't take vacations. A lot of people took short vacations to make sure they were there on Sunday so that when someone new came in, they wouldn't feel like they were all alone or that the church didn't have any people in it.
There was no mistaking it. Cornerstone was here to stay, and with Pastor Ron as its leader, there was a buzz in the air. The mission was clear: to seek and save the lost, whatever means necessary. And they sure did try a lot of things.
Well, I think a lot of people have done, walking door to door and handing out flyers and invitations, and of course we've done that. Having dogs chase you away is kind of an interesting, exciting part of that. But probably some of the more interesting ones are being at the Walmart overnight, for Black Friday, giving out free hot chocolate and coffee to people, going to the Blaine Blazing Fourth, doing crazy zombie types of things, being in a parade. We were several years in a parade, the Blaine 4th of July parade. One year we actually won for the best band going down, so that was fun. And then also just in the Blaine every year has a 200 family plus garage sale, and just walking through there and handing out candy and water and flyers to people who were garage sailing.
We did vacation Bible school in the mobile home park to have a facility to not just to do vacation Bible school for our kids, but our thought was always to do it as an outreach, to reach out to other people. Lots of crazy stuff. I mean, Ron was an idea a minute kind of guy.
Well, there was flyer distribution. There was Blaze and Blaine Days was kind of interesting, and we would number one, we would participate in the parade, but we also had a tent set up during Blaze and Blaine Days, and we had done spiritual interviews. And in fact, Ron would one of the ideas that Ron had was we're going to pay, if people will sit down and do an interview, we'll pay them for it. And we just had some wonderful, wonderful interactions with people, and were able to share God's love and really get a sense for where people were at. The flyer distribution, walking around the neighborhood and meeting people and distributing flyers, that was...
I remember one day, we were into soccer season with our own kids, and we were in Blaine Sports Complex, and all of a sudden Ron started thinking, well, why are we sitting here? Why aren't we talking to people, giving them a candy bar and handing them a flyer and telling us about our church? And it's like, can't we go anywhere and just sit like normal people and watch our children,
Cornerstone had a clear culture of going out and reaching the community. But when people visited, they could also feel the electricity behind all that God was doing. Cornerstone was a place where you could meet people like you, meet God, make great relationships, and get plugged in quickly.
Oh yeah, Ron would always meet new people, say hi to them, and if they got to church 2 times, especially the 3rd time, but sometimes even the 2nd time, but he would wait till the 3rd time and invite them over to eat with us. But once in a while, he just couldn't stand it. He just wanted to meet him so badly, he'd invite him at the second time. But, I was under a little pressure with Zana, and so we had kind of a just tell me when it's going to happen kind of. If he set up the invitation and he told me what date and time they were going to come, I promised I'd have a meal ready for whoever came. And that was one of our favorite family things. If anybody played a game, we'd be playing a game afterward. And every once in a while we'd have to say, oh, these aren't the game kind of people. And the kids would be kind of a little disappointed, But we just had a great time, and good for me, just connected with every single person that was coming through, and some stayed, some didn't, but we really had a chance to get to know them that way.
And what kind of man would inspire so many ordinary people to do such extraordinary things for God? It didn't take long to find out just the kind of man it was that God had lit a fire in to reach Blaine and the surrounding community. Ron Sykes was many things to many people in those years of incredible growth, and it was easy to see that Ron Sykes was no ordinary pastor.
Hi everyone, this is Pastor Ron, and I'm here to tell you an exciting opportunity that we have coming up this January. We are going to do something that's called Quake. Quake is short for Earth.
Ron, now I'm going to have to try to not get choked up. Ron was one of the most amazing people I've ever known. He just had a way of reaching every person in the spectrum, he could relate to someone who was, the biggest believer and just lived every moment for Christ, and people who had never even heard of Jesus. And he related to all of them at such an amazing level. And that's really what drew people, I think, to Cornerstone in the beginning, was just Ron and how approachable he was, and what a real, amazing person he was. So we were really fortunate.
Ron was a great guy, just super down to earth. You could tell he wanted everyone to know about Jesus and wanted everyone to have a relationship with him, and not like in a weird way, but it was from his heart. Super cool. I think that's what I loved about him most.
A pastor really, the way I've always thought about pastors is they're shepherds, and shepherds tend their flock. They care about their flock, time of day, time of night, weather conditions, circumstances around when a sheep needed care didn't have anything to do with whether the sheep got the care. Ron was there to tend the flock and to feed the flock and to love the flock.
He loved sports, he loved life, he loved games, he loved people. He just loved it. And sometimes he'd get a little grumpy if I told him he needed to get a little more Bible heavy, but he knew just with the kids and with his activities in life, how to take what was happening in his life and relate it to what was going on in the world and in the church and in the Bible.
He was a lead by example pastor. Heart of gold. Couldn't wait to go home one day, and wanted everybody to be there with him.
And as it happened, he would get his wish to go home to heaven earlier than anyone had ever imagined. After his wife had beaten about with cancer, and he had beaten one too, things suddenly took a turn for the worst.
Then he had his famous softball game with the church where he hit the ball and ran to first base, and he just couldn't get his breath. I wasn't there, but I heard he had everybody pretty concerned and went to the doctor, and eventually we found out that it had come back, the melanoma in his lungs and everywhere, and then even in his brain. So from the minute we knew it came back, we knew that was it, that it was fatal, and that we only had a limited amount of time before he would die.
There's so many levels to it. There was initially a disbelief. Ron was too young to die. there was a deep sadness on a personal level. This young guy with a young family and so much hope for the future is going to be taken. And it, you know, at a certain point, there was just absolutely no doubt that, you know, Ron was dying. And then, you know, kind of behind all of that as well was, you know, what's going to happen to Cornerstone.
It was very scary. Obviously, it was sad just on a personal level, as he was a very close friend of ours, and obviously his family was first and foremost in our minds too, just what they were going through. But then it was scary from idea of what was going to happen to the church. So much about Cornerstone was Ron, it seemed at the time, that it was hard to imagine it going on without him. But what was amazing about the experience was about how just the strength of Cornerstone really came through. And we quickly realized that the church was more than just Ron, which is how it should be, obviously, but and the way that the people came together in the body of Cornerstone both surrounded Ron as his family, but also just strengthened our resolve to make this continue on and continue to grow, both because we're all a part of it and we wanted it to continue to grow, but also because we knew that was what Ron wanted at the end of the day.
But it is what it is, and I truly do have a peace, and I worry more about the family and you guys and stuff like that, and I'm bummed that if I do go, I won't be at my own funeral to hear the good things that people say about me. I think that would be cool.
And on July 24th, 2011, only a few months after finding out the cancer was back, Pastor Ron Sykes went home to be forever with the Jesus he loved and served so faithfully. The principal at Blaine High School held Ron in such high esteem that he donated the use of the school's auditorium for the memorial service. And it's a good thing he did. Ron had been involved in many things and it had impacted many people.
But Ron was out there in the community connecting with people in so many ways, through his work as chaplaincy, through his, you know, time that he spent in kinship and Alexandra House and playing basketball at the Y, and just all of the people that Ron sincerely kept contact with, that he cared about, that he partnered with in the community and in ministry. And so here was this little church, and Ron Sykes died. Man, I don't know how many people were at that funeral, but it had to be 500, 600, 700 people, at least. And it was it was a time when people were smiling, remembering Ron, and remembering the impact he had on their lives, the friend that he was. It was a joyous time for such a sad time.
And so Pastor Ron was gone. Cornerstone Church was still a church on a mission, a grieving church, a tired church, a church not quite sure what would be next. But while they grieved, they never lost sight of the mission God had called them to. They would eventually get on about the task of looking for a new senior pastor, but in the meantime, Cornerstone needed an interim solution. Matt Ashworth would take the part-time role as an administrative pastor to help relocate the church's office and files from Ron's house and handle the logistics of the massive change. As for interim, turns out God had placed just the right man right in the congregation, a man who was already a friend of Ron's, who had been regularly preaching at Cornerstone for years. Pastor Alan First would agree to be Cornerstone's interim pastor.
We talked about ourselves during that time, through that time, as a family going through a crisis together, shared grief, shared desire for an outcome that was positive, and all pulling together to do that. And it was just that kind of shared commitment to making this happen, and have, just being in that unique spot where we could.
Alan was a great guy. He was a friendly guy. People liked him. He was a great speaker. He had fun, engaging sermons. And it was a natural step for him to take over and be our interim pastor. It helped, I think, create a sense of continuity for the church. He'd been around for a while. The people knew him. And it was a great interim step.
I just remember, looking back and seeing how God had put together this group of people who were just shoulder to shoulder committed and to seeing this work survive. The body of people who loved each other so much that they wouldn't allow anything to tear them apart. And just, that was it. I mean, we had the right leadership at the right time. We had Al there to step right in as interim pastor, and it's just amazing how God carried us through that.
Once again feeling small and fragile, but of one mind, much as the core team once had been, Cornerstone tried to understand what the mission would look like next. Pastor Allen was doing an excellent job at the helm, and it was time to begin looking for who would be Cornerstone's next senior pastor, a task that still seems surreal to the grieving church.
The fear is that you're going to pick the wrong person. It was a difficult time because it's hard to know. We really put our trust in God and said, God, we need you to find the right person for us, because obviously with what our church had been through, the kind of devastating loss that it was with Ron dying, we didn't want to make a mistake. We didn't want to have the wrong thing happen to us again, because, at the base of it, we were worried that we couldn't survive another loss like that. So at the beginning, it was really scary. And then what happened, you start seeing resumes, you start seeing, profiles of people. We get to see their faith statements, all those kinds of things. And it was, in my lifetime, one of the biggest examples of God working, because the moment we saw Jeremy on paper, didn't even see his face. We didn't know, We saw him on paper and we all went, that one's really intriguing. We need to take a second look at that. Part of the process is that we call references, actually, before we even talk to the person live. So Dana Spandy actually got the pleasure of calling Jeremy's references. And she came to our next pastoral search committee meeting, and she was like, guys, you're not gonna believe it. She's like, this guy is amazing. She's like, he seems like everything we want. And of course, those of us who hadn't heard firsthand what Dana had heard were a little skeptical. Well, can he really be that great? All that kind of stuff. Like, seriously, he doesn't walk on water, Dana. Let's, get a little realistic. And she's like, no, we got to talk to him. That was our next step in the process, is who do we pick to actually interview. And she's like, we got to talk to him. I'm telling you, I feel like he's amazing, and we need to talk to this guy.
I got a call from Sarah Barsness from the search committee, and she said, we're Cornerstone Church of Blade. We're where you grew up. We're a church in the northern suburbs, and we're a church plant, and we'd like to consider you for our senior pastor position. And I just hung up the phone, and I've been praying for a long time, and I've been praying that God would provide a church, honestly, just like this. I wanted I didn't feel called to start a church, and this church was already started and running. I didn't feel like I wanted to turn a church around, like an unhealthy church. I'm a young pastor. I don't have that kind of experience. And so I wanted a spiritually healthy young church and in my hometown by my friends and family, and it just blew me away. Just God answered our prayers to a T. And
I remember when you got that phone call. Yeah. That, your jaw just dropped. It was like you're never gonna believe this. And I'm trying to I'm looking at him and I can't hear what's going on. So I'm thinking, what is being said? I'm waiting. I just have to wait. And he gets done. He's like, you're never gonna believe it. And I was like, what? And he said, Cornerstone Church has called me and want to go through the process. And they're in Blaine. And they're a recent church plant. And he starts telling me about it. And I'm pretty sure we were, well, you know us, right? So we teared up and we were crying. And it was...
I think, given who we were, it narrowed the field quite a bit. To be in this young suburban church, It took the right kind of guy, and I think, as I recall, we were down to 2 or 3 people fairly quickly.
So our next step, like I said, was talking, and because some of our candidates actually were not local, it was a national search, and so we did it over Skype because one of our candidates was located in, I think, Arizona at the time. So we're in my living room, we got the big TV set up, Jeremy comes on, and we spent, I think, over an hour for sure talking with him, and it really wasn't that many questions, but it just all flowed really naturally. And again, it was just, God was working in that whole experience, because we stopped, we ended the interview, and we all kind of looked at each other and sort of didn't even say anything at first. It was like, okay, that seems really like that could be the guy. There was, again, like I said, I can't say it enough. It really was God working in the whole entire process.
Having had an initial interview via Skype that went extremely well, the committee presented their candidate to the elder board, and with their agreement, a formal live interview was scheduled. The plan was a potluck-style meal at a board member's home, a meal with Jeremy and his wife Sarah, and the entire search committee and board, followed by a more thorough interview between Jeremy and the board. This would prove to be an important night for everyone.
I just remember the part where we walked into Matt Ashworth's basement to meet the elders and the whole entire search committee, because that was the first part that I was a part of. And I've never walked into a room like that and felt like I just already knew everyone. It was like I was meeting friends that I had for a long time, because everyone was joking around with each other. I mean, people were laughing, people were teasing each other, people were just having conversation. It wasn't like dead silence. And I just thought that was an amazing feeling. I mean, it just, right away, my heart felt at ease, and it was like, oh, great, we're home. I mean, that's what it felt like.
And holy cow, if you thought Jeremy was the right guy for the job, meeting Sarah just cemented it. My first encounter with Sarah was like seeing once again a friend that I hadn't seen for a few years. It was just amazing. Just so welcoming, so sincere, so open.
So John Middlestad, at the end of the interview, just wanting to set expectations, he goes, well, we're going to decide, and we'll call you back in a few weeks, and so expect a call in a few weeks, because he's trying to be professional and just not get my probably expectations up or my hopes up.
Weeks.
Yeah, before he'd actually had a chance to talk to everybody, right? Because you got to talk to everybody, make sure that they seem to feel the same way. And so John says a couple weeks, and I was like, oh, okay, and kind of tempered the excitement a little bit. And I go home, and it wasn't a few weeks. I think it was only a couple days later, and I got a phone call, and that was just wonderful.
The phone records are proved, but I feel like it was like the next day.
Yeah, we should go back and check.
Felt really quick.
And it was the next day. The search committee and board reconvened the following evening and pretty quickly decided that this had to be the man God had called to his church at Cornerstone, the man that would continue leading them in the mission they'd set out on 10 years earlier.
And then Sarah called him, and I could even hear her excitement on the phone. Because he's on the phone, so I could hear it. And I'm really close by listening. At that moment, I was right there next to Jeremy. Do you remember what she said? And then she's like, we just met, and we would love for you to be our pastor. I thought that's what she said. And it was just tears. It was so much joy. She was so excited. It was the best day ever. I remember one of the key things is having learned the history of Cornerstone and how much they love Jesus, how much they love their pastor, and how much they had a passion for others to know him and love him. That when I learned of that and I met everyone, I could see that having walked through the journey of the life of their church and the life of their pastor, and then having entered into a grieving point when he was taken home to heaven, that I could just see in them that they walked through that valley together with Jesus. And I think that was, so apparent. And they walked through that, and God was bringing them out of the valley to this mountaintop to celebrate. And I think I could just feel the joy just emanating from their hearts. And I think when we walked into that room and walked into the church, that's what we felt. We could see that These were people who were real with each other, who just walked through deep suffering and great sorrow and came out with Jesus still, knowing and clinging to his promises and waiting to see what his deliverance was, waiting to see what God's next step would be in their lives. And that's where God brought us in. And I think we think, who are we to be the ones to do this? But God had his hand on it, so we knew that it was us who was called to that. And I felt that they knew that God was bringing us to this position. So it was just this Jeremy had compared it to getting married. It's like, prepared for each other and then ready to meet and be together forever.
It was really fun to be the recipient of that type of joy, because when a church walks through the history that Cornerstone has and then comes through it and celebrates the hiring of a new pastor, I mean, it was pretty special. And so it was great to receive that type of warmth and welcome.
Upon acceptance of the search committee, the board, and Pastor Jeremy and Sarah, it was time to take the next very important step: introducing the first candidate that Cornerstone had ever met. Jeremy would have a couple of Sundays to preach and to meet the members of the congregation who was hungry to get to know the would-be new young pastor. Jeremy and Sarah sent ahead a message before he came.
Hello Cornerstone, my name is Jeremy.
And I'm Sarah.
And we've really enjoyed getting to know the search team and the elder board, and are really looking forward to coming out and meeting you all on November 18th. I'm actually from the area. I grew up and lived in Blaine, and my father before me as well grew up and lived in Blaine. And come to think of it, his father before him also grew up and lived in the area. I've descended from a long line of people who are from the area, which actually reminds me of one of my favorite genealogies, which I'd like to share with you right now. Mizraim fathered Ludim, Ananim, Lehabim, and
Jeremy, why don't you save that for your next sermon?
Oh, you mean like give them something to look forward to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Well, we'll look forward to coming out then and meeting you and getting to know you all a little bit better on November 18th.
See you then.
Not long after meeting him, the congregation overwhelmingly agreed with the search committee and unanimously voted Pastor Jeremy Lind to be the next senior pastor at Cornerstone Church of Blaine, the next pastor to lead them in the mission God had called them to. Over the coming weeks and months, the congregation would continue to get to know their new pastor, and they were pleased.
We had a candidate that we gave a call to, and he accepted, and so really joyous that he could come in and I could feel the breath of the fresh air of the church turning the corner and gonna survive. If you've seen Jeremy, I think you've seen Ron. The other day when Jeremy was doing that thing about baseball, he was on and on about how they were taking steroids and stuff like that. I thought that was Ron reincarnated.
And he was like Pastor Ron in all the ways that mattered to this church family. He was on mission and marching forward, leading the church to make an impact in each other's lives and to spread the love and message of Christ into the surrounding community.
Cornerstone's a place where you can really connect with God and really connect with others, and that's what people need and that's what people want. And so I think Cornerstone, there's a reason why I'm a pastor. If I wanted to do great things, I could also serve the poor primarily and only, or do this or do that. But as a pastor, I feel like I can lead a church in meeting the society's greatest need, which is that need to connect with God and connect with others.
And I feel like in Blaine specifically, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and I moved here for college, and having seen that the northern suburbs have just exploded physically, like all these buildings, many people moving out, lots of families, and as that development happens, I think one of the things that's needed is the church family to be present there, to be sharing Jesus. And so I think that's the need that I saw. Was David had always said that the surrounding area, Blaine and the surrounding area, really is very unchurched, that the church doesn't really have a presence there, that there's a need for the church to be there. And so I just felt like that was the mission of Cornerstone.
As the church continued to grow, so did the number of children and young people. It wasn't long before the board saw a glaring need. and look to address it.
One of the terms that we talked about in terms of what type of church, what type of ministry we were we a go-to church or a come-to church? Basically, a go-to church is one that goes out into the community and interacts with people and brings them in. The other is a come-to church where you have an array of really excellent programs and a nice facility, and people want to come and they come. And I think one of the things we sensed early on was there was no such thing as a pure form of that. Because if you went out into the community, if you were the go-to and you were out into the community, when people came, there were still certain things that had to be right in order for them to feel like this was their church home. And especially with young families, their children, they have to feel like this is a place where their children will be safe, where their children will be able to grow spiritually, be taught well, be taken care of, that there would be a ministry to the whole family across the full range of ages. And so taking care of youth ministry was a very important thing for us to take care of. And to be able to find a guy who could do both youth ministry and worship was a great deal.
So we saw the posting online and started doing, of course, a lot of research and looked at the website. And I think what struck us right away was the fact that it felt like a very just down-to-earth, very welcoming place. At that point in time, Jeremy had just been hired, so his little video spiel was still up there and was incredibly cheesy, but yeah, it just had a very welcoming feel to it, very different than everywhere else we were looking. So I think that's what struck us right off the bat.
Yeah.
Well, he did apply, and after a short interview process, Dan Swartz rose to the top and was hired to be the next youth director at Cornerstone Church. And he would also take the worship director position to make it a full-time job, spelling longtime volunteer leader Bruce Cox in the ever-growing time commitment that was leading worship. Dan would be Pastor Jeremy's first hire.
Well, first of all, it was cool that me and Jeremy were both kind of new, so it made me feel like I wasn't coming into something that had been here forever, and like if I touch something, it could shatter and break because it's old and brittle and destructed. You can edit that. But yeah, I think me and Jeremy at first didn't really know what to do with each other because I was his first real employee and he was my first real boss, and so we kind of had like, so what do we do together? Like, I like you and you like me, but what do we do? But as things got along, we started to get along a lot better and really understand how we can help each other do what we do. So,
as Dan and Jeremy both settled into their new roles, the church was quickly growing fond of the new young youth director.
It's very interesting. Dan is a graduate. He's been through seminary. He's got a master's in divinity. To see that level of just kind of rigorous academic and doctrinal teaching and knowledge in a youth pastor or a worship leader is unique. I think he brings a level of, he's transformed our youth group. He really has turned it into a great group of young kids who are bonded together, but who really have a heart for ministry and for kids their age, and they bring other kids in. I think that he's created a culture within the youth group that's just terrific, and it's a good, it bodes very well for the future.
When Dan first started, I kind of was thinking to myself, really, who wants to come and work with these kids all the time and have it as a job? Not just this voluntary thing that they do, but as a job. And to teach them not just the fluff, but the hard stuff that teenagers go through, and to walk through all of that with them.
Probably my favorite thing about Dan is we'll have a prayer request or something will come up and he'll say I can continue to pray about it or I can be the answer to the prayer. And he just goes above and beyond. He's the real deal.
Dan was definitely a good hire. Yeah.
It seemed that Dan was the right next person to join the mission to reach the lost. A great fit in a growing church, things seemed to be continuing in a very positive direction.
That was one of those moments where I was so happy we had gotten Sarah and Jeremy and Dan and Bethany, and Ron wasn't there, but I looked at that and it was sad, and I thought, you know, these are the exact kind of people Ron would have picked to come work in this church. There was no doubt in my mind. So exciting.
The church continued to grow and add people of all ages, especially children.
The kids, we get more and more kids every week, and you know, we've really focused on we've been very purposeful about how we've focused areas of the church, right? We get our new pastor, we realize a need in for a worship and youth leader, and we found an amazing fit in Dan. And then you kind of step back and you say, okay, what's next in Cornerstone? And one of the things that became readily apparent was our kids ministry is like going gangbusters, which is fantastic. So that was really where the next need was. And again, God stepped in and fulfilled that need in a fantastic manner. And that's where we found Katie Jo. She, again, was a great fit for us. We were a great fit for her. And she has created this amazing presence and just a new sense of energy in Kids Connection. She's got kids doing stuff at home. She's got families coming together. We're doing stuff outside of Sunday mornings. It's fantastic, and I think the kids are just loving every single minute of it.
I think my favorite things about Katie Jo is the first thing is that she just loves children. This is what she wants to do with her life, and you can tell it's what she wants to do because she thinks about it when she's not working. Right now we've got her at about 10 hours a week, I think is what her job is officially paying, but she probably thinks about ministering to children, 60 hours a week, and that comes through. She's got great ideas. She's got great passion for youth, and again, this is what we want. That's what we want in a children's director. And the other thing that I love about her, she's just a perfect fit. She's so welcoming and inviting, and that's exactly the way Cornerstone is, and that's what we want and need as well.
Katie Jo has an amazing love of Christ, which just shines through in every single thing that she does. She has a smile on her face all the time. I mean, constantly. She's so much energy for the kids. They respond to her. They love singing with her. They love all the great stories she does. The lessons that we do in Kids Connection are fantastic. And like I said, she's super creative. So she's coming up with all these new challenges that we do on a monthly basis for families to do. And it's really just expanded what kids ministry is at Cornerstone.
It fits our family because everyone there, I feel like everyone's there, has the heart for outreach. And that's something we've had a heart for a long time as a family. And my favorite thing is every staff meeting at Cornerstone, the first question that comes out of Pastor Jeremy's mouth is, how have you reached others for Christ this week? And I've always been in a church setting or in a Christian preschool setting where I feel like, well, yeah, they all know about Jesus. But they might not, honestly. And to go out every day and to go to the grocery store or to go to a kid's soccer game and having the opportunity to think in your back of your brain, how can I reach someone else for Christ right now, is something that I knew I wanted to be part of. And just coming there at the church on Sunday, we just felt like that was part of Cornerstone Church.
And thus, despite a history of both triumph and struggle, the stage continued to be set for the mission God sent his church on way back in 2002, when he gathered a small core team to start a church to reach the people that he loved in the Blaine area.
In Blaine, I think our greatest needs are not about things. We just have this great abundance of stuff in our nation and in our community. And I think our greatest need is a spiritual one. I think on the most part, we're spiritually impoverished. And, that's why I'm a pastor. I want to meet people's greatest needs. And our society, we just keep going farther away from the relationships that fulfill us and bring us meaning and purpose. And people just continue to feel like further and further from those and feel like their lives are more and more purposelessness and meaninglessness. And Cornerstone has those relationships, the relationship with God and the relationships with other people that bring people back to where they're supposed to be. And
I feel like it's like know Jesus, live Jesus, in the daily life as a church. So the church is not just happening on Sunday, but it's happening throughout the week.
Full of humble people like its leaders, Ron and Jeremy, Cornerstone isn't merely a place to visit on Sunday morning. It's a spiritual force to be reckoned with, a challenge to the ever-growing darkness in her community, a beacon of light, of hope, raised and kept by Jesus Christ himself, set on his mission to accomplish his goals, born in love, carried out by humble servants ever seeking his direction. Come see what God has done, what God is doing in his church, Cornerstone Church of Blaine.
It's been really cool to see how things started with us here at Cornerstone and how God really worked and moved to bring us here and to put me in a spot where I can use the gifts that he's given me. And it's been awesome to see how he's blessed it so far. We are really excited about what God has been doing in worship and in youth and at Cornerstone in general. And we're just so excited to see what he continues to do, because this is just the beginning of what God has for Cornerstone, and we can see that clearly, and I hope the rest of the congregation can see that as well.
The rearview mirror is really, that whole thing about just putting your head down, trying to listen to the Lord and serve him and obey him. And then you look back and you see what he has done. That's when you know that this is God's work. Because he's done way beyond what any of us could have done. Beyond what any of us could have hoped for. And so I don't know what's in Cornerstone's future, but boy, I know that if we can just keep our eyes on Jesus and obey him, it'll be wonderful.
It's just so neat to see and think about and pray about what God is going to continue to do. As that space continues to grow, we have more room. We have even more seats to be filled, and as we're praying over those, it's just going to be awesome to see what God does as he brings people through those doors. All because of the people that are there who are present. All because of the people who are a part of our church, who make our church, who invite Jesus into their heart and then want him to change them throughout the week. And they continue to be in relationships with people. I think we're constantly amazed.
Yeah, the doors in the auditorium have been open the last few weeks, and my last month or so, and when I'm preaching, I can stand up there and just look at everybody, and you see those open spaces in the back, and I don't think it'll be long before we see those filled with people who are coming to Christ.